Thank you so much for having me. I would like to thank ACC for having me here, as well as Print Austin. This is such an honor to be here to speak with everyone about my work, but I'm even more excited to share Legacy Print Council with you. I want to talk a little bit about the group and how organically the group was formed. And I think it was a necessary for us to come together as a group to, share our practice with the world as well as with each other. And so I'm going to start off because I really want you to, I'm going to talk to you about how we got started, which is really phenomenal that we were able to come together and form a group in such a short time. It literally started off with myself reaching out to Chloe Alexander, who is an artist based in Atlanta, as well as Jamal Barber. And I was like, hey, I really love your process. Do you think that you could show me what you do? And she's like, oh yeah, come to the studio. So I'm in the studio with Chloe, Jamal's there, and we start talking, start sharing process and helping each other. And then, of course, you're going to Instagram it, right? You got to show it for the gram. And several artists reached out and was like, hey, you should have told us you were going, maybe we could have met up. And so I said, well, why don't we just meet at my studio? And so Print Legacy Weekend was born. And so I want to show you guys really how, a little bit about, I'm going to show this really short video about I think I'm doing this right. I want to show the energy that we had with the group. So we did interviews in the space. Every artist worked on on their individual works. We came together again, was helping each other with whatever we could offer to each other. So it was pretty amazing moment. So that was just a little bit about the energy. You couldn't hear the music, but that's okay. So Jamal Barber was one of the founding members of Legacy with Print LPC, along with myself and Chloe Alexander. And we all work in different various printmaking mediums. Jamal works in several mediums. Most of the work that I'm familiar with him is his relief work, which is what you see here. But also, I was really excited to see him push the boundaries of printmaking and create these metal sculptures that cast shadows and lights, and really just kind of pushing the boundaries of printmaking. Another of our members is Rashawn Rucker. I want to say Rashawn had a show here in Austin not too long ago, but again, drawing and printmaking and relief, and you'll see his work here. Shauna is a San Francisco-based artist. Absolutely incredibly amazing. Relief, intaglio. I think most of us, for the most part, work in various mediums within the printing area, as well as bringing in painting and other things. Ann Johnson, very dear friend of mine. She will print on anything other than paper. And so I love watching her work. She's printed on leaves. She's currently creating work where she's actually printing on bricks that she's making in her studio. And so you can kind of see here, this is the brickwork that she does. Rabea Bain, she is just an incredible draftswoman. She does alternative processes in printmaking as well. She does a lot of work about hair. And so you'll see the crown of heads and the back of heads, and they're very beautiful, detailed works. Here's a piece that she did with the Circassian women. And she actually did an exhibition that we had together where she created the hair tonics that the women use to create these afros, basically, during that time. Jess is another artist. She works with Shauna. They're both based in San Francisco. And here you see her work. She does a lot of murals as well. This is Chloe Alexander. She is one of the co-founders of LPC. This is her work. She is an incredible, amazing silkscreen artist, but she also does relief and other printing processes as well. And Ben, who is, I think Ben's running Print Austin, an amazing gentleman. I actually met Ben for the first time Legacy Weekend. Chloe calls Ben and says, "Meet me in Houston." And he says, "Okay." And so he was the first person to show up. And I was like, "Hi, Ben, I'm Delita." He's like, "Hi, I'm Ben." So it was really great to, make new friends and hang out with old friends as well. This is Steve Prince, who is also a member. Steve is that printmaker that does everything: metal casting, bronze casting, drawing, painting, murals, you name it, he does it. And then there's me. But it was very exciting again to have all of these artists in my space. We actually stayed in the studio as well as my home. So it was really great. We spent an entire weekend together, and we are looking forward to planning more weekends like that and actually working with other artists outside of the group as well to bring them along to hang out on some of the legacy weekends that we're planning. So I'm really excited about that. I hope you guys will, take an opportunity to look these artists up and become familiar with their work. I assure you, you will not be disappointed. So I am a printmaker. I did not start off with printmaking. I actually began my art career as in drawing. And I want to say in my undergraduate year, we had a printmaking department at Texas Southern, but there wasn't enough students to make the class. So my entire tenure there was a print lab with no classes. And so printmaking was never a thought on my mind until one Saturday, I go into the art building to pick up my sketchbook, and the print door is cracked open. And Dr. John Biggers, Harvey Johnson, who's a professor, Dr. Biggers' mentee, and Charles Kreiner, a Houston-based lithographer, and Early Huttenall, a Houston-based photographer. They were in the room, and Dr. Biggers at the time, he was sick, and he was literally in the studio in his bathrobe and slippers, and he was signing these prints. Charles Kreiner was rolling the lithostone, and Harvey was wiping, and Early Huttenall was photographing. So I kind of sneak in, and I just sit in the corner, and I'm watching this magical dance. That's the best way I can describe it. That was happening. And I was like, wow, one day I'm going to do that. And I'm looking at all these chemicals on the table, and I'm like, how are you, creating this beautiful, delicate, just beautiful prints with all of this stone and this acid? I mean, who does that, right? But I made a mental note to myself that that's what I was going to do. I'm going to do this one day. So I made my first print at 30. I decided I was going to go back to school, and I wanted to go to graduate school, and I chose printmaking, which was really interesting because I was the only person in my program that did not have a print background. So I came in with drawing. Everyone else had a degree, undergraduate degree in printmaking. So I had to learn fast. So I started off with relief printing. That was the first printing process that I learned. And my professor described the process to me in like 30 minutes or less. From the time it took her to go in her office, pick her lunch up, and walk to the door eating an apple, and left me in the print room with a press that I had never in my entire life used before. So that was the quick and dirty introduction to printmaking. But after graduate school, I went into the studio full time, and I decided that I wanted to figure out a way that was going to make printmaking my own. But I still had a love for drawing. I had a love for painting, and I had a love for all of these other processes. Like, how do I bring and marry all of those things together to create what I want to create? Because at that point, it wasn't about creating. I mean, it wasn't about being a printmaker. It was about creating. It was about how do I tell the story and tell the message. And so I developed this philosophy where if printing didn't work, I would draw it. If drawing didn't work, I painted it. If painting didn't work, I would collage and stitch and all of the things to get the story out. And it was it was at that moment that I became an artist. So people ask me, when did you become? I became an artist when I accepted who I was and what I wanted to do. Because in school, if you make prints, you're a printmaker. If you're a painter, they tell you to paint. I can do all those things. I love all those things. So I love inviting people to have that conversation with me about what is a print or what makes a print. So the piece that you see here, full disclosure, the slides aren't in order, but I'm going to talk about each piece individually to give you an idea of my practice. So this is a very large piece. It might be as large as this screen, maybe a little bit smaller. I love to work large, and I work large because it allows me to change the conversation. So the women in my work have historically been marginalized in general. And for me, when you walk into a room and you see the scale of these works, and you have, 10, 15 pieces in a room, you have to ask yourself the question, am I the viewer or am I being viewed? And I use that as a way of leveling the playing field in a way. And so scale is very important for me. I work really large. Do you see what I see? So this is probably one of the smallest pieces that I do. Again, I love working large, but every so often I try and switch over to a smaller piece. And that's more about me trying to, be able to transition and do what needs to be done. I believe that sometimes we can work in a certain way where we get stuck. And I don't want to be stuck. So every now and then I'll throw in a small piece. So this is one of those small pieces. The person in this is a really good friend of mine from LA. And she and another friend, actually I met them during the pandemic on Zoom, and they came to the studio and hung out with me. It was our first time meeting, which was really great. LA, this was a portrait that I did for that. LA. So again, talking about pushing the boundaries of printmaking and how I perceive printmaking, these are fairly new works that were created for my retrospective that was up in San Antonio. And this is the work, I refer to it as Afro-Cubism. So I wanted to look at Cubism, and I wanted to think about how I love Cubism. How can I, and not to take away from, Picasso and him and all his friends, they were wonderful, but it goes back to Africa. And it's like, how do I look at African sculpture, think about the body, and recreate it in 2D? And so that was one way of looking at this work, but it was also, how do I talk about the veilscape? How do I talk about the spirit world in a different way? And so if you look at my earlier works, you had the entire backgrounds that were patterned. And the pattern in the backgrounds is about the veilscape. It's the spirit world. And so for me as an artist, my responsibility is to make the unseen seen and the intangible tangible. And so how do you do that? How do I tell that story? A professor once told me, you don't draw anything or do anything creatively that you don't know anything about. It is your responsibility as the artist to bring it to life. If your spirit tells you to draw an apple for the next 2 years, there's a message in it that you're supposed to learn, and that's what you're supposed to do. And so I started thinking about the spirit world, and I'm like, how do I visualize that? And so it became color, it became texture, it became pattern. And for me, that mimics that space. It mimics life, it mimics, spirituality, it mimics all of these things. And when you look at the women and you see the patterns on their skin, and you see this push and pull between the mediums that's happening, that's how we transition in and out of that space. And so that's what you see here. And so when I talk about changing the conversation, I created these shaped pieces to not just talk about Cubism, but also as a way of reintroducing the spirit world. This piece came before that work, and you can see how I began to break the work up, and I'm moving more towards that, the idea of 2D, this idea of Cubism and creating the shaped paper. So you're able to see that here. So Still Hold Me Close is a self-portrait. I really didn't do a lot of self-portraits, but the pandemic really hit us really, really hard. And I lost my mother and my brother within a month of each other during that time. And it was a very difficult time, and I couldn't see myself. When I think about it, I'm like, okay, that was my mirror and it's broken. How do I see myself? And so I began to do self-portrait. And the self-portraits allowed me to really figure out where I was and how I needed to navigate the space that I was in. So this is not the piece, the introductory piece, the piece that's on the banners that you see. That was the first piece that was created when my mom passed. This is, I want to say, the second or third piece that was created, but it's me being nurtured by spirits, the ancestors that you see here. This is another self-portrait. And so I've done quite a few of these since that time. And again, I think it's been very helpful in me in figuring out and navigating the space of where I am and what we see in the world today. This is another piece from the retrospective. Again, dealing with these are all individual pieces of paper that have been collaged together. Printmaking's involved, so you see relief printing here. There's silk screen here as well as drawing and painting. This is another piece. This is a smaller piece as well. I think my standard small piece is like 40 by 60. And one of the earlier pieces, I broke that in half. This is another piece of the two ladies that I spoke about from San Francisco. This piece actually debuted in London, which I was really excited to debut this work. One of the exciting things about it was that the women in these works, particularly from my Conjure series, are all women that I met online during the pandemic. I did a virtual model call for women that I didn't know, and I would screenshot. I would tell them how to pose and how to move their bodies, and I would just do a screenshot. And so these are pieces that are actually done from screenshots. This is 6 persimmons. I use a lot of symbolism in my work. So growing up with my grandmother, she was a quilt maker. So every night we would quilt together. And so when we were quilting together, she had these stories that she would tell me about the fabrics that she used in the work. And it was like old clothes. There was I want to say like an interior design place that was in town. They would give her pieces. So there was always a story with every single thing she touched. And I didn't realize it until I got older, but two things were happening. Number one, she was teaching me, she was passing on to me the legacy of oral storytelling. I just had to find my voice, and my voice was the visual. And so spending time with her in the evening sewing. And y'all, she taught me one stitch, and that's the only stitch you're going to see in the work. But it was important because she was stitching together my history. She was stitching together who I was going to become, all the people who made me who I was. And I wanted the viewer to have that same experience with me. So it made sense to bring stitching into the work. Another really intimate moments that we had was she had mason jars and Folgers coffee cans, and she had things in them. So there were buttons, there were brooches, there were all sorts of things that you would find. Every so often, we would dump it out on her bed and she would go through every single piece. And I don't care that I heard it 100 times. It didn't matter. It didn't matter if the stories were true, but it was just an intimate moment. But the second thing that she taught me was my visual language, because that's when I began to associate people, places, things, and events with objects. And I use those objects in my work to talk about the women in the work. And so here I use the persimmon fruit. We had a persimmon tree in our backyard, but persimmons are known as the fruit of the god. And this is a double self-portrait of me in a dream state. We always had birds at our house. My grandmother loved birds, and they would fly around the house and they would play with us, but the birds became the human spirit. And depending on where they're positioned, if their feet are bound, all of those things have different meanings that I come up with in my work. This is another piece that I did for the London exhibition. Again, bringing in the stitching and thinking about masks a lot too. And so if you look at these women, even though you see their faces with the patterns, you also see a mask. And so that's a symbol of their transitioning that happens. So then I started thinking about, how do I push the boundaries of printmaking? What is a print? What defines a print? And so I created the dinner table installation. And that, I got the idea, and I had been toying around with it in my mind. And I go to Starbucks like every day. And I was living in Arkansas, and I go to Starbucks and I'm hanging out with my favorite barista, and I'm just excited telling her about the project. And she was like, "Oh, okay. So where do you live again?" And so I told her, not thinking anything. So that evening when I got off work, I came home and there were a stack of plates that were waiting for me on my doorstep. And this installation, I mean, it did a lot of things. So it wasn't just an art project. It turned into a social experiment. It turned into so many different things. When the show was being hung the first time, I realized that it's literally a 3D version of Facebook. You got to see people were connected to each other that I had no idea were connected. People were coming into the installation. "Oh, is that so-and-so? Oh, who is that? Oh, I know that person." And I had no idea. So you could literally take a string and just link all of these people together. Another thing I learned was that, a lot of people don't like themselves the way they look. So I started off asking people to photograph them for the project. They all said yes, but it was like, "Wait, let me see. Oh, no, let's take it again." I was like, "Oh gosh, that's not what I want to do." So then I said, "Well, that's not working. Let me figure something else out." I said, "Well, you send me the picture." Well, the pictures became heavily filtered. And I'm like, that's not quite what I was going for. So I'm like, go back to the drawing board. So what I decided to do was invite people to hang out with me or just go to their social media and pick what I wanted. Because I wanted the essence of who they were. I wanted who they really were and who they really stood for. But this is a total of 300 plates. All of the plates are hand-drawn using a litho crayon. So I still wanted to think about printmaking in terms of the material I was using, repetition. And so when I think about this installation, I think of a varied edition. So it's an edition of 30 portraits. The plates had to be white. They could have a little trim, but not too distracting. Various shades of white. But I think what was the most important thing about the plates was that they had to have been used. They couldn't be bought from, the store. They couldn't be new. because I wanted that history. I wanted you to be able to feel the history of, like these people, the women in the work. LA. This was probably my biggest public and largest public art project that I did at Rice University during the pandemic. They wanted artists to come in and create work outside on the buildings. And this was, I proposed to them a meditation space, a space where students and community could come and sit. And they said, okay. So I created this work, and I had them create a platform where students could sit, because I wanted them to sit in the Veilscape, to sit in that space and talk. So this is a pic of that. This is the installation I was talking about. So this is called Follow the Water. So we had the traditional retrospective, and I created this installation space next door. So it's 2 galleries, but you were able to walk into this exhibition, and it was really about a place of prayer, a place to commune. And so you see the shaped work and see how they interact with the space itself. So they're coming from and through the walls. The patterns that you see on the walls, other than the portraits, were all painted on the walls. So, LA. Blue is the color we see before we die. I did a project with LEAP, which is an organization in LA founded by Ava DuVernay. And she handed out, she selected artists from all over the country. And I want to say it was about 50 different artists with anywhere from culinary to literary works. And we were tasked with choosing a court case and addressing police brutality. And we were asked to unmask the police at the time. So the piece that I chose was from Bastrop, Texas. A woman that you see here reached out to the police to settle a dispute between her husband and his son. The police arrived. They had a conversation. It was pretty much over. She walks out the door, and the police officer shot her within 3 seconds of her opening the door with his own personal assault rifle that he brought with him to the job. And so this was a really heavy project. I'd never done anything this heavy. And at the time, my mom was in the hospital. So it was like, how do you sit with this and then deal with this and be creative at the same time? But I really wanted to, it was really important for me to walk the viewer through the story. So the 2 figures that you see in the center are the son and the husband, and they're in conversation. The woman, Yvette, this area are poppies, which is a symbol of death, funerals. And I placed it here because this is where she was shot. If you look at the police officer's hand, he very flippantly makes the gun sign, but he's also wearing a police flag that's upside down and backwards to speak about a system that's broken. But I also named him and used the badge from the actual police department as well. But you can see here the pattern on the pant is the gun that he used, the type of gun that he used to shoot them. And I used cone flowers in the back to symbolize community and strength and standing tall throughout this whole thing. So that was a really difficult project that I had to do. And here's another view of the dinner table. And when you're looking at the dinner table, what I like about it is that anytime someone exhibits it, I ask that you show at least 150 of the plates, and they cannot be gridded on the wall. You have to creatively display them. So it's almost like seeing it for the first time every time. And this is from the retrospectives. LA. LA. And the final project that I want to talk about is Project Row House. I was in round 53, and that was the critical race theory. LA. And so our house was called LA. LA. It just ran out of my mind. LA. 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 I think of it. But anyway, it was about the color blue. And LA. This is a room that I created. I had never created an installation space within a room. And it's like, how do you create the veilscape in this space? So I took the smallest room because I wasn't quite sure what I was doing. But you can see here different shots. So the two women from LA here and here, they actually surprised me and came in, and we did a prayer in the space and offered sage to the visitors. And I think what was so impactful about that moment was we're in prayer and we look up and the room is filled with people. We had no idea that they were there, but it was such an impactful moment that we sat there and we prayed and we talked and we fellowshiped in this space. And that was very much what I intended to happen in the space. So that's an overview of, my practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delita. I'm going to invite you to come over here and we can sit down and have a conversation. So I want the audience to think about questions that they have, and we can turn to them in a minute. But I want to start thanking you again. It was really great to see all of your work, the overview. I have many questions in different artworks, different ways. But before we kind of dive back into your work, I just wanted to take a second, because one of the things that I was excited about this talk because of the Artist Collective.
Yes.
And I know that's obviously something you're very passionate about. And so this is more of a question maybe I'm asking for students in some ways, where what do you get out of the Artist Collective, right? I mean, I know it's a big question, but and obviously you have colleagues you get to work with. There's probably some logistics that help, but I just wanted you to open up with thinking about why an Artist Collective and why should artists think about going that route.
I love to learn. I'm always open to learning. I don't think you're always learning. And I feel like these are such incredible artists in their own right. I'm forever learning from them. And that's the first thing. So it's kind of a selfish reason, but they're incredible. But the other thing is being able to create a space for artists to come and work. It was wonderful. Everyone, egos were left at the door. It was just complete fellowship. And it's amazing when you work in those types of environment, the creativity, it's like energy that you're just feeding off of. So I was fed for weeks after that. So we're all looking forward to the next Legacy Weekend to carry on. And I encourage students to find organizations like that they can work with other artists, they can learn from other artists and share opportunities. That's very important for your artistic growth.
Great. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand and I'll get to you. I'll just keep asking questions until we have more from the audience. Is there a little bit of feedback? Does it sound okay? Everything's fine? Okay.
A little bit, ma'am, you're just a little bit quiet.
Okay.
Am I too quiet? No? Yes?
Should we switch?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe turn that on. We want to make sure that people can hear you. That's very important.
Yes, testing.
Okay, good. All right, good. Well, all right, I'm going to go backwards. I had other questions I was going to start with, but looking at this one in particular and the way you were I want you to talk more about the veilscape. I know that's something that connects a lot of your work. Mm-hmm. And when I was looking at this piece in particular, but really all of your pieces, the idea of bringing the spiritual world into our world, or maybe not bringing it in, but at least seeing it, right? And so thinking about the choice that you make using two-dimensional art to do that, whereas three-dimensional art, and you do three-dimensional installations, but you're not bringing figures. You're not creating a sculpture that is in our same space. So thinking about like the veilscape and these invisible, are we not allowed to have them kind of in our space? Like, is that distance important, that it's 2D versus 3D?
No, I think that the veilscape is a space that we're in all the time. We're in that space right now. When you walk into a room, I guess the best way to describe it is when you walk into a room and you get a funny feeling or you are reminded of something, there's a fingerprint, there is a presence that was left in that space at all times. And children recognize this very well. Adults do not. By the time you're 12, 11 or 12, your parents are like, no, that's not true. That's make believe. But we're always in that space. I choose to recognize that space. And so it's like, how do I show that in our work? What does it look like when my mama prayed for me? That's a visual. How do I show that visual? I can show her transitioning into that space where she prayed. And that's what my work is about.
And so then just going off of that, the figures then engaging the viewer, right? And engaging the
Yep.
Can we get the presentation that goes cycles through? Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much. The way that not all of them, but many of the figures are looking at the viewer, right? And so
And that's intentional because I've just changed the conversation. Like I said before, are you the viewer or are you being viewed? Throughout history, you think about it, women, marginalized, Black women marginalized, women of color marginalized, people of color marginalized. So I am confronting you with a gaze. And, you can choose to stay or you can choose to walk away. You can choose to engage. You can do whatever you want to do. But I am this larger than life figure. I will not back down.
So how does that affect you as the viewer after you make the work? And then do you have a relationship with the artworks and
Absolutely.
the people? Yeah, I'd
Yeah.
love to hear
So
about
people ask me all the time about the titles of the work. And the title is the very last thing that happens. And so the best way to describe naming the work and living with the work is I have to spend time with it. And once I spend time with the work, then she tells me who she is. So the work naming is the last thing that happens in the piece.
So do they become, so they're modeled after people that you know in many cases?
In the beginning, they were not. So in the beginning, I thought about I was using the idea of the great mother icon, the idea that we all come from this central person, that we're all connected. And that still holds true. But I became interested. I was in Arkansas at the time, and we were deciding to come back to Houston. And I realized I'm very interested to see what my mother looks like in the veilscape or what my sister looks like in the veilscape or even me, for that matter. And anyone who creates a portrait, you understand that there's intimacy that happens when you're drawing someone because you're looking at that gaze, the tilt of the head. You are very intimately looking at this person through your eyes. And not only are you looking at them on an intimate level, but when you bring life to the work, whatever connection it is that you have comes into the work. So I don't draw people I don't have a connection to. So I'll sit there, I'll see someone that I'm interested in including in my work, and there have been just incredibly gorgeous people, but I didn't connect with them. So, I'll have to pass on that.
Any questions? Can you just wait just one sec, because we're also having it on Zoom, so they won't be able to hear you.
This is kind of a basic question. You don't have to go into a lot of detail, but I don't know anything about printmaking, but I saw your card and I love your work. And I love the fact that you incorporate cloth. Can you talk a little bit about how you connect it all together in just a very basic way? I know probably people.
So, from the technical standpoint, I start off with, I work in layers, and I generally start with a flat color. And from there, the pattern comes in. Every layer that I create dictates what happens on the next layer. When I go into the studio, I rarely, if ever, have plans. I don't like to have plans because I want to leave myself open enough to receive and execute I'm a vessel at that point. And so the pattern comes in, then the portrait comes in, and then I have to decide how much of the portraits I'm going to use. And then it becomes, are you going to push something back? What needs to come forward? All of those things are determined by the previous layer. And so the the works that I have here are all paper. I have brought in fabric at times, but I very much use paper the way you would use fabric.
Kind of want to follow up about process a little bit because I'm thinking about from the collage standpoint, how much extra material is around in your studio, like pieces. Yeah, just please talk about that.
So I'm not a hoarder, but I am a collector. I don't believe in wasting anything. I like things, and I think I get that from my grandmother as well. Things inspire me. So you might find jars of buttons, you might find fabric, and I don't know when I'm going to use them. Just to give you an example, the decorative papers that you see, I started collecting them my first year in grad school at my very first printmaking conference. And they're so beautiful, but they're extremely expensive. And so I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I just knew I had to have them. And so I put them in a drawer for several years, and I was like, oh, every now and then I take them out and look at them and rub them and then put it back. And it wasn't until, oh, wow, I think it was maybe after graduate school when I figured out how to use the paper. And it was so incredible, such an incredible experience. It became my version of fabric. So,
But then the final result is a mixture, and a lot of times you're just redrawing also patterns and kind of you're collecting material, collecting objects, but you're also collecting patterns, right?
yes, 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 yes. I mean, I am always working. So everyone in here wearing a pattern, I've already scoped you out and decided who I was going to ask to photograph. So, I mean, I'm constantly working. I'm looking at colors, I'm looking at patterns, I'm looking at textures. All of those things inspire me all the time. So I'm always working.
Are there other questions?
Hi, Delita. You talked a little bit about importance of scale, both for, you know, as the viewer and as you're experiencing the work. But I'm curious about your experience working physically with that large of a scale in multiple disciplines that are all very labor intensive.
I'm broken. No, I'm kidding. It is very taxing on the body. But I love it because, again, that's another layer of intimacy. So I work on the floor most times. So I'm generally covered from head to toe in ink and charcoal and paint and all the wonderful things. But it's another layer of intimacy with the work. So I'm sitting on top of the work. I'm rubbing up against the work. I'm barefoot on top of the work. I mean, just whatever I need to get done in terms of stitching the larger pieces, because everything is hand stitched. I have 2 tables. I'm underneath, stitching. So I make it work however I can. So there's no real way. My friends all tease me about registration because I have to create it as I go because I never know how it's going to work out. But I think that's what I love about printmaking too, is the having to figure it out, the unpredictable nature of printmaking and having to problem solve. I think I get really excited.
Well, just another follow up for that. Many printmakers work very, very small, and
Yeah, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I cannot do it. Which is really interesting because I did not start working large until after graduate school. And I think I enjoyed it because when I entered the program, it was like, you need to experiment with everything, your first year. And as you can see, I lost my mind. But it was a wonderful feeling to be able to use color and pattern and texture and just go crazy with it. So it really changed my mindset to think about the sky is the limit. So I never think about what I can't do. I always think about what I can do. And my gallerist, I always tease her when she's like, "Oh, we have this exhibition, you have this opportunity," and I'm like, "Okay, well, give me my guardrails now because I'm going big." So.
I think we had a question over here.
Thank you for your work. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for that incorporation, sort of being unafraid of attending to spirit in your work. So often, secular spaces, art school spaces in general, institutional spaces can be made so nervous about the presence of spirit. And we know in African tradition, spirit is always present. Like you said, you reminded us that spirit is always present. I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you about the veilscape to go back to that and think a little bit about Du Bois and what that means to sort of see the veil, as I understand it, as something that obscures the relationship between Black folks and white folks. That there's an impossibility of seeing. It takes me back to your piece. The blue is the last color I see before I die. Also, Imani Perry's new book on Black and Blue together. I wonder about sight and race and to what extent you grapple with that, and if there are bits that you place in the work, this is just stunning piece of work that are only visible or that are not visible based on sort of our racial visual landscape, if that makes sense, or sort of racial experience, or there are little bits that you put for sort of Black viewers, Black eyes, African American eyes in particular, that are sort of not visible. Just thinking about Du Bois and what can be seen and can't be seen across those boundaries of race.
I don't. I don't put a lot of weight on that, but not maybe for the reason you're thinking. Um, I create what I create because I guess I understand when people are told how to create. And I think one of the interesting things is I give talks and people have, asked me, well, why don't you do white people or why don't you do white women? And my answer is always, they're already in the museums. They're already in the collections. We are not. I have a cultural responsibility to Black women and, Black men to put us in spaces where we are not. And so, again, I became an artist the day I stopped caring what other people thought about the work. Not everybody's going to love my work. I get that, and I'm okay with that. It's one of those cases where you build the table because you can't sit at the other table. So I built my own table. Now you're welcome to come and sit here, but because I invited you to the table doesn't give you ownership. So yeah.
There's two questions from Zoom that I'll ask. I'll ask them one at a time, and it's very much related to this part of the topic. So it says, for dinner plate, was the white dinner table a conscious choice, or was it a happy surprise, for lack of a better words?
No, it was intentional, and it was intentional because I was looking at Judy Chicago's dinner party, I think, and I clearly was not invited. And that's fine. That's no problem. I built my own table. But how do I create something in that spirit but make it open to the world, the men, women, and children? And so the whole idea of bringing 300 women together is I want 300 women who impacted my life. And when I talk about impact, I had to think about what impact meant. Sometimes a smile can make a person's day. Sometimes hi, how are you doing, can stop a person from harming themselves. You never know what your interaction with someone is going to relate to. The women that you see in those portraits, some I have known all my life, some I have only heard stories about, like my great great grandmother. I created a portrait of her, and I'd never met her. But that was important to me, was to be able to bring people to the table. Why did I choose white? I chose white because it was a space that was open, that allowed these women to exist and allowed us to see them without distraction.
The second question, you preempted it already, because the question is actually, how do you see your dinner table in relation to Judy Chicago's dinner table? So yeah,
I
that's
wasn't invited.
right. No, that's pretty
And so,
astute here.
you know,
Yeah.
but yeah, I thought it was important to have a table where others can come. And what's been so exciting is to see how that piece has been received. It's been in spaces where a group of men came in and they actually sat down and sang spiritual songs. One day, there was a lady, an older lady, and some younger people. They were at the table talking about relationships. So it's about a space for us to come together and commune, and that's it.
Yeah, I love when artworks has that subtle interaction. It's
Yeah.
actually quite invasive to the work, because
Right.
but in a way it's such a normal thing to do, but to not do that in that space and have that that ability is really a great part of the building of the work. As you're talking about your great grandmother, I wanted to ask kind of a follow up to that, thinking about someone that you didn't personally know, and kind of that that process. Did you try to talk to family members, do like or an oral history
Yeah,
type?
absolutely. Well,
And
that was that's something that's always been a part of my family. Like, people ask me, it's like, well, how did you know you wanted to be an artist? And my response is, I grew up in an art school. We had quilt makers, we had writers, we had painters. People were always drawing. Someone was always creating. I was always creating. So when I was around 5, I was like, I'm going to be an artist. I didn't truly know what that meant, but that's what I was going to do. And so I came home. At some point, I must have told my parents, and they would introduce me as, this is my baby Delita, and she's an artist. Baby, go get some of your work. And that's how I was introduced to people. So there was never a plan B. There was never a second thought. I was going to be an artist, whatever that meant.
great. Other questions?
No, I'm from Conroe, Texas. Oh, really?
I was just wondering where you're from. I walked in
No worries.
familiar with.
Thank you.
Well, I guess just thinking about that, I mean, also choosing to stay in Texas, right?
Yeah. I mean, I love Texas. It's definitely impacted my work. I think when I was around the 4th grade, I always took art classes, and my 4th grade teacher told me that I was using color incorrectly, whatever that means. And so I stayed away from color until graduate school. And they were like, experiment, try things. And I was like, I very timidly started back doing monochromatic work. And so, because that stuck in my head for whatever reason, I could not wrap my mind around color theory in school. And so I stayed away from color. And so, in order to learn color, I chose artists that I liked their paintings, and I mimicked their color palettes in my work until I had a physical understanding of color.
Can I ask you which artists in particular that you gravitate
John
towards?
Biggers was the main artist that I looked at because I loved his color palette, and that's what I did. Yeah.
See, that's probably a good. Another one of my questions I kind of wanted to dig a little bit into more, and it actually says color palette here. But thinking about your relationship to Cubism,
Mhm.
I mean, you started to talk about that, and I really want to take that a little bit further, because they're not here right now, but they'll come around. You're thinking about Cubism
Yeah.
as a intellectual process as much as an aesthetic one.
Yes.
And so when you're thinking about looking at a subject from multiple sides or multiple dimensions, which is what
Mhm.
Cubism did, in a very kind of physical, perspectival way. You're taking that and you're pushing it. I'm asking. You're pushing that forward and thinking about the veilscape, right? And thinking about
Exactly. So
the
how do I have
right.
my process mimic context, the content and context of the work? How do I have process mimic that? And Cubism was a natural fit for that. You know, the idea of looking at a subject from multiple perspectives. I mean, that's religion, that's faith, that's spirituality all day.
Right. But so that's how we should be reading those
Yes.
works with the different, like this one here, the different
Levels, layers,
levels. Yeah,
layers.
the different
Mhm.
layers and
And
levels.
when you're looking at the piece, if you walk up to the work, you can see the tactile, portion of the work. You can see all of that.
So then should we think of the pattern also as part of that multi-sided element to them?
Absolutely.
That's great. That's very cool because then you're really mixing representational art and abstract art
Yes.
and design to some degree too
Mhm.
into
Yeah.
everything. Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. I have a question. This is also from Zoom. When did you work during the pandemic, and did you find any challenges in that aspect? Do you have to change your method? Did you have to change your methods in any way?
I did not have to change my method. I worked every day. I didn't, we couldn't get out, so we couldn't get models, but I literally went on IG. I said, I need models. People, emailed me, responded to the call. We did a Zoom call or we did FaceTime. And I'm like, okay, put your arm here, do this, do that. And I screenshot it, and that was it. Um, I feel like as an artist, you adapt to whatever you need to do. If you're in a 2 by 2 room, then you make 1 by 1 work, right? And so I was in the pandemic and I had to figure it out. So it wasn't ever a break in the work per se. I think it was a very introspective time for a lot of artists because you really got to see yourself and your practice. Um, you were basically confronted with it. So any issues that you had plenty of time to grapple with it.
Did you feel like there was even with all that, was there like an explosion of work after, and you could work in a new way or a different way, or go back to some of the
Um,
techniques that you're using that might not have been able
I
to?
think the only difference in the work during the pandemic was, trying to deal with death and trying to deal with the personal impact of it because you're going through it all. People are dying, people are getting sick, you can't leave your house. You're dealing with all of those things on all those different levels, but you're a creative artist and you had to figure out, how do I pay the bills? How do I work? How do I continue to thrive as an artist? And so that was a challenge. But I never stopped. So it was part of who I am.
Other questions? I think we have one over here.
Hi, I was so excited to learn about your work with the Legacy Artist Collective, and I
Yes.
was wondering, are you thinking of this more as artists sharing resources, or will you think about creating works together as a shared?
We
Um,
are actually working on a portfolio now. One work will be an individual work that everyone will create to go into the portfolio, but one work is also a collaborative work. So one of the nights we were having pizza working, and we put our names in a hat and we drew our partners. And so we're all working on a collaborative print for this portfolio. But I envision us continuing to work together, but also working with other artists in the future as well. So,
You know how many editions you'll have of the portfolio? Is it?
yeah. Well, we're all very ambitious artists. So I think, I want to say we said like 10, maybe 20. Yeah, something like that.
Which is another great thing about printmaking. You can
Exactly.
make an actual portfolio. I think there's another question here.
Hello.
Hello.
So one of the things I noticed across a lot of the pieces that you shared with us today is the color blue.
Yep.
And I know that you talked about it in your piece. Blue is the color we see before we die, the symbolism of it. But I was just curious if it held any other symbolism for you personally.
Yes.
You kind of talked about the monochromatic aspect before.
I don't think of blue just as my favorite color. I think of blue as a spiritual color. And, you know, like I said, I work in different mediums, but I always go back to the color blue and the color and drawing to center myself. So blue is that color that I go to when I'm trying to figure it out, or or I need to say something that's really, really important. I tend to gravitate towards blue. When I darken colors, I tend to use indigo blue. So it's just always been a part of my practice. And I think the first time I understood how important it was, my father had passed away. And several years later, we're going back through images from the funeral services, and his entire funeral was blue, and all of his children were in navy blue. And we did not plan it, nor did we realize it, but it made me stop and think about all the times I've used the color blue and why it was important to me.
It's amazing, amazing story. Similar to that, similar to colors, thinking about composition
Mhm.
a little bit, because I think they're very striking the way you're using, you're fitting figures into the frame, and then sometimes you're just kind of floating them kind of maybe in space a little bit more. And the one that really struck me is the persimmons, sick persimmons. And I don't know if this is maybe too much information, but I don't know if persimmons, like the seeds, right? They have this mirror image. I'm not sure if that's all persimmons, but that kind of struck me when I was looking at your work. We have these two people, and then a persimmons has like a very beautiful seed that almost looks like a violin or something like that. Was that in there?
That honestly was not at the forefront of my mind, but just the fruit itself, the idea that it's considered the fruit of the gods, and it's very, symbolic in that way. That was me in my dream state. So
And then I really like the way you transition away in the installation works, where obviously it's very much your style, everything's put into it, but you're kind of like, I feel like you're uncontained from the canvas or the paper
yes.
in a way
Mhm.
that's kind of extraordinary.
Yeah, I wanted to, again, it was another way for me to have a conversation about the veilscape, another way for me to think about the spiritual world. So, like I said, normally you have this entire piece that's covered with pattern, but what if you had a solid colored wall where the images were coming through? So, again, a different way of looking at the spirit world. There's these little peaks of it that happen, little holes that have been cut into the universe where you look into.
Well, not all installations would work this way, but if you had multiple rooms to go through, that would be
We're working on it.
right. Okay, good.
We're working on it.
Does anyone have any last questions? Oh, there's another one in the back.
Delita Martin. Black Box Press. Yep. Uh-huh.
I just had one more question about the gold leaf in your work.
I can't hear you. I'm so sorry.
Sorry. I had a question about the gold leaf in your work and if it's necessary selective. It kind of seems like there's some works where you're using that gold leaf for very specific objects. And I'm just curious about the intention with that.
Yeah, the gold leaf is typically used on the earring. And so when you think about, I guess, objects like, the Super Bowl rings or, all of these things that bring you into a group, that's what the earring does. So the earring for me is about these women that have come into the fold of knowledge that has been given to them from the women before them. So you are now a part of us. You are now one of us. And so not all the images have them. I always find it interesting that the very first, I've been doing the earrings for years and waiting for someone to ask that question. And one day, finally, someone asked the question about the earring. My ears were pierced. I think I was 6 months old, and my mom pierced my ears. So I've worn hoop earrings since I was 6 months old. So I'm never without these, some shape, form of a hoop. And so the circle is another symbol that you'll see in the work. It doesn't matter. It symbolizes the female presence. And it relates back to the earring, and the earring relates to the moon, and the moon relates to the female.
I guess on like continuing that, this the idea of memory also, right?
Mhm.
And how that functions
Oh,
with
yeah.
symbols, with people, and I think it's wonderful how you're almost taking all these elements and you're presenting them, but in a lot of ways they're the same thing that
Yes.
you're showing in different
Printmaking.
ways. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Printmaking.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well. Oh, another question.
I just have one final question. I
Mhm.
recognize some students in the audience, and you've explained a lot of the lessons that you've learned through continuing your practice and learning your artistic practice through grad school. But I'm just kind of curious, do you have a piece of advice you would share to young up and coming artists or any kind of guidance that you might share?
I think it's important for you to decide what type of artist you want to be. And when I say that, are you a graphic designer? Are you art for art's sake? Are you in it for the money? It doesn't matter. But whatever it is, you as the artist has to be okay with it, and you alone. And once you figure out what it is that you want to do, um, someone once told me, go effortlessly in the direction of your artist dream. So you need to study, you need to research, you need to reach out, you need to be involved in the arts community, all of those things. But it's important to identify who you are so that you can stand up for what you want, so you won't fall for anything. So that's important.
Well, I think that's a great way to end the conversation, and
Thank you.
please join me in thanking Delita for this great talk.
Thank you.